A single gunshot tore through the silence of Crescent Pines, and an innocent golden retriever collapsed in a pool of blood protecting the little girl who called him family. The officers said he was a threat. But what if they were the real danger? What if they didn't know? Her father was a decorated Delta Force commander trained to dismantle war zones. If you believe in justice, if you believe that God sometimes sends angels with fur and paws, then stay, because this story will break your heart and restore your faith. The late autumn sun filtered through a veil of amber and rust-colored leaves, casting warm shadows over the winding streets of Crescent Pines, Oregon. A gentle wind stirred the tall trees that lined the neighborhood's wide sidewalks, and the smell of wood smoke and pine needles clung to the air like memory. Crescent Pines was a town that prided itself on its perfection. A quiet, picturesque suburb nestled in the arms of the Cascade Mountains, known for its manicured lawns, uniform mailboxes, and social order as neatly trimmed as its hedges. But beneath the quiet charm pulsed an unspoken tension, a polite tightness around smiles when unfamiliar faces passed by. Jack Carson parked the dark blue SUV in front of their new house at the end of Sycamore Lane, a modest two-story home with a slanted gray roof, green shutters, and a wraparound porch Eleanor had once dreamed of. The house stood among larger, more expensive homes, their stone facades and Tesla Chargers announcing wealth more loudly than any words. Jack stepped out of the car and stretched his broad frame. Standing at 6'3" with graying temples, deep-set eyes, and a body still carrying the discipline of 20 years in the military, Jack had the presence of someone used to command, though now softened by grief. He looked over at the passenger seat. Lily Carson, his 11-year-old daughter, sat quietly, hugging her knees to her chest. Her dark curls spilled over the collar of her oversized sweatshirt, and her brown eyes, once bright and endlessly curious, now looked dulled by loss. She hadn't spoken much since Eleanor died 8 months earlier. Jack knew the words weren't gone. They were buried deep beneath the ache of absence. He opened the door and held out a hand. "Come on, sweetheart. Let me show you something." Lily stepped out into the cool November air, her gaze scanning the unfamiliar street. She clutched her small sketchpad tightly, the same one she used to fill with drawings of constellations and dogs. Jack opened the back hatch of the SUV, and a moment later, a golden blur leapt down onto the driveway. "Lily," Jack said gently, "meet Buddy." The golden retriever bounded toward her with a fluid grace, his feathered tail wagging in sweeping arcs. Buddy was 4 years old, with a sunlit coat and warm brown eyes that shimmered with intelligence and gentleness. He moved with the practiced awareness of a dog trained not just to obey, but to understand. A small tag on his collar identified him as a retired military therapy dog previously assigned to comfort veterans in recovery programs. Buddy paused a few feet from Lily, his posture, respectful ears slightly tilted, waiting for her to make the first move. Lily knelt slowly. Buddy stepped forward and pressed his head into her arms. She didn't cry, but for the first time in months her arms wrapped around something that didn't vanish in the night. Inside the house, boxes lined the hallway. Jack had barely unpacked, but made sure the essentials were set up. Lily's telescope, her mother's framed photo, and now Buddy's plush bed placed at the foot of Lily's. That night, as the wind rustled the trees and whispers of pine drifted through the open window, Buddy curled up beside Lily, his head resting on her ankle. She slept the whole night without waking. Across town, a different story was unfolding. In a cluttered office above a quiet cafe on Main Street, Maya Ellis hunched over her laptop, a frown etched deep into her brow. 24 years old, fresh from journalism school, Maya was a first-year reporter at the Crescent Sentinel. With coiled curls pulled into a bun and large glasses always slipping down her nose, she looked more student than journalist, but her questions cut deep. She had a voice like water on stone, persistent, not loud, and a drive fueled by watching her own father, a black Air Force mechanic, be passed over for promotions his whole life. Tonight she was digging into something that didn't sit right, a growing number of complaints in Crescent Pines involving traffic stops, home inspections, and citations, all targeting a pattern. Veterans, single parents, families of color, and all brushed under the rug. Maya clicked open another PDF, a case file about a Navy widow fined $800 for an improperly parked vehicle. The photo showed it perfectly aligned with the curb. Something in this town didn't want certain people to stay. Back on Sycamore Lane, Jack sat on the porch sipping weak coffee. Buddy lay beside him watching the street with alert calm. Inside, Lily was drawing in her notebook again, sketching Buddy under the stars. Jack looked up at the sky above Crescent Pines, now ink blue with pinpricks of silver. "Thank you," he murmured. He didn't know if he was thanking God, fate, or Eleanor. But for tonight, for the way Lily had smiled when Buddy licked her hand, he was grateful. There was a long road ahead, but they had taken the first step. The morning fog clung low over the sidewalks of Crescent Pines, blurring the edges of hedges and driveways, making the world feel smaller and stranger. It was Lily's third morning in town, and the streets still felt too quiet, too trimmed, too watched. The leaves had begun to dry and curl, scattering in lazy spirals across the pavement. Buddy walked beside her, his leash held loosely in her left hand, her right gripping the strap of her backpack. He trotted with quiet dignity, his golden coat gleaming despite the haze ears flicking at every rustle of wind. They passed by manicured lawns and perfect flower beds, but the greetings Lily had grown used to in her old neighborhood, the friendly nods, the smiles from porch rockers, were absent. Curtains moved slightly as they walked by, but no one came out. One man with steel-gray hair, wearing a red golf sweater, stood motionless by his mailbox, watching them until they turned the corner. Buddy didn't react, but Lily did. She felt it like static under her skin. She'd known what it meant when people averted their eyes. Her mother had taught her early that silence could shout louder than words. At the intersection near the small playground, a police SUV pulled up to the curb. 2 uniformed officers stepped out. Officer Nash was the older of the 2, mid-50s, tall and burly with a square jaw and a trimmed white mustache. He wore his sunglasses even though the fog made the sun almost invisible. Officer Granger was younger, mid-30s, short-cropped hair, clean-shaven, with an eager look that clashed with his partner's caution. His eyes locked on Buddy as they approached. Morning Nash set his voice flat. Lily stopped, unsure if she should speak. Buddy, sensing her hesitation, stood still but alert. "That your dog?" Granger asked, gesturing toward Buddy. Lily nodded. "His name's Buddy. He's licensed." Granger squinted. "Can we see proof I think my dad has the papers," she stammered. "At home." "Don't you think you should carry it?" Nash asked. "Especially with a dog that size." "He's trained," Lily replied, voice barely above a whisper. "He used to be a therapy dog." Granger took a step closer. Buddy shifted slightly, placing himself more between Lily and the officer. So, Granger muttered, glancing at Nash. "That's a pretty serious claim for a kid to make." "He listens better than most people," Lily said, her voice tightening. "He's not dangerous." Before either man could respond, Jack's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Is there a problem here?" He approached from across the street, wearing a flannel jacket over his usual black t-shirt. Eyes locked on the officers. His posture was relaxed but direct, the kind that didn't flinch. "Just checking on dog licenses?" Nash replied, his voice not unfriendly but distant. Jack nodded once. "This dog's registered. His paperwork is in our file at home. Former military support canine. Everything's in order." Granger shifted on his feet. "We've had complaints. Just trying to keep things safe." "Complaints?" Jack asked. "From who?" "That's confidential," Nash said quickly. Jack stepped forward slowly. "Let me be clear. This dog is not a threat. And my daughter," he rested a hand gently on Lily's shoulder, "doesn't need to be stopped on her walk to school." There was a long pause before Nash finally said, "Just doing our job." "Then do it fairly," Jack replied. The officers exchanged a look, then turned back toward their vehicle. Granger looked like he wanted to say more, but Nash gestured to keep walking. The SUV drove off slowly, disappearing into the mist. Lily exhaled for the first time since they'd approached. "You okay, Jack?" asked her quietly. She nodded, but her fingers stayed tightly wound in Buddy's fur. That evening in the newsroom of the Crescent Sentinel, Maya Ellis stared at her screen, a growing map of data points lighting up like stars. She had been tracking civil complaints and enforcement incidents across the county. And something stood out in the past 5 years. A disproportionate number of warnings, fines, and compliance checks had been issued in a specific cluster of streets where newer residents had moved in. Most were single parents, military families, or people of color. She rubbed her temple and clicked another tab, an anonymous forum she had found during a late-night rabbit hole. It was full of cryptic chatter usernames hidden behind old war references and Americana imagery. But one name kept reappearing: Heritage Watch. She dug further and found a long-buried article written nearly a decade earlier by a retired local journalist. The piece alleged that Heritage Watch was a community integrity council formed after a controversial rezoning plan brought in a more diverse group of homeowners. Officially, they were a neighborhood safety advisory group. Unofficially, they worked with certain officers in the Crescent Pines Police Department to maintain the community character. The journalist had tried to expose them. But shortly after publication, he was sued for defamation, lost his press credentials, and disappeared from the local news scene. Maya leaned back in her chair. Her eyes flicked to the whiteboard beside her desk, names, dates, notes in red marker. She drew a new line connecting the recent incident on Sycamore Lane to the Heritage Watch name. She didn't have proof. Not yet. But she could feel it, like a pressure building under the surface. Back at the Carson house, Jack stood at the window, arms crossed, staring out at the street. He hadn't told Lily everything: how Granger had kept his hand resting on his holster, how Nash had scanned their yard as if casing the property. Something about the exchange wasn't routine. It was a warning. Buddy lay beside Lily, who was sketching again. This time it was a drawing of a dog standing between two people, one small, one tall, and a shadow approaching them. In her world of pencil and paper, Buddy was always brave. Jack picked up his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he landed on one marked Jasmine, Civil Defense. He didn't call, not yet, but something told him he might have to. He looked back at Lily and whispered, "We'll be ready." It was the kind of afternoon that almost fooled you into thinking the world was peaceful. Sunlight poured through the branches of sycamores, laying golden bars across the sidewalks of Crescent Pines, and the wind carried the crisp, clean scent of the season's final leaves. Lily wore her favorite NASA hoodie, slightly too big, its sleeves rolled back to free her drawing hand. Her sketchbook was tucked under her arm. Buddy walked beside her, as always, his leash gently coiled in her fingers. His gait was steady, calm, head slightly lowered, the very image of a well-trained companion. They took their usual route down Willow Creek Path, a wooded trail that bordered a quiet stretch of the neighborhood where fewer cars passed and the trees rustled like lullabies. Buddy was alert but not anxious, pausing occasionally to glance back at Lily with those soft, expressive eyes that seemed to ask, "Are you okay?" They had just reached the bend near the pond when it happened. A police cruiser came around the corner too fast, tires crunching over gravel and fallen leaves. Lily instinctively moved closer to Buddy, tightening the leash slightly. The cruiser rolled to a sudden stop 10 feet ahead. The driver's door opened. Officer Granger stepped out. He wasn't wearing sunglasses this time. His expression was unreadable, tight-lipped eyes scanning the scene as if expecting trouble where none existed. His hand rested near the holster at his waist. "Hey!" he called out. "That you again?" Lily stopped. Buddy halted at once and sat beside her, tail still. She nodded silently. Granger stepped closer. "You walking that dog without an adult again?" "He's allowed," Lily answered, voice quiet but steady. "I have permission." Granger's eyes narrowed. "That dog doesn't have a muzzle. Some people get nervous with big breeds. You know that, right? He doesn't need one. she replied, clutching the leash tighter. "He's gentle. He's trained." Buddy didn't move. He simply adjusted his stance slightly, placing himself half a step in front of Lily, a subtle but protective gesture. His ears flicked once. Not aggressive. Alert. Granger took another step forward. Then everything unraveled. Buddy let out a soft, low bark. Not a growl, just a sound of warning. It was the kind of sound a trained dog gives when something feels wrong, when space is being violated. Lily's hand dropped instinctively to his back. Granger's hand went to his weapon. "Control your dog," he snapped. "I am," Lily said quickly. "Please don't. He's just nervous." But it was too late. In one fast, horrifying motion, Granger drew his pistol and fired. The shot echoed across the water, a terrible sound that shattered the golden quiet of the day. Buddy staggered back, a sharp whine leaving his throat. Blood bloomed across his golden fur. Lily screamed, dropping to her knees, reaching for him. "No, no, no, Buddy," she cried, her hands pressing against the wound as he collapsed, his tail twitching once. "Stay with me, please. I'm here. I'm here." Granger stood frozen, weapon still drawn, his expression flickering between disbelief and defense. "The dog lunged," he said aloud, as if convincing himself. He was about to attack. "I had to." Lily didn't hear him. Her focus was only on Buddy, on the way his eyes flickered toward her one last time, as if trying to comfort her, even as the light dimmed in them. From across the street, hidden behind a row of trees, Maya Ellis had been photographing the trail for a feature on fall foliage. She wasn't supposed to be working that day. She was chasing color, not conflict. But she'd heard the voice then, the gunshot, and her instincts kicked in. She raised her phone in trembling hands and hit record. She caught the aftermath, Lily crying. Granger frozen, the lifeless golden form in her arms. She'd seen enough. More than enough. Then she backed away. A branch cracked beneath her foot. Granger turned sharply, eyes locking on the movement. He didn't see her face clearly, but he saw a figure. A camera. "Hey!" he shouted. "Stop!" Maya ran. She didn't stop running until she reached her car, parked 2 blocks away. Once inside, she locked the doors, her breaths short and panicked. Her phone buzzed. An anonymous number. She stared at the screen, her heart hammering. The message read, "Delete the video. Don't get involved." She didn't know how they got her number, but she knew this wasn't random. This was something planned. Back on Willow Creek Path, Jack arrived moments later, having been alerted by a neighbor who heard the shot and saw the flashing lights. He dropped to his knees beside Lily, who was now quiet, her arms still wrapped around Buddy's body, her NASA hoodie stained red. "Lily," he said softly, trying to lift her face. "I'm here, baby. I'm here." Her lips moved, but no sound came. Granger was already on the radio, talking to dispatch, his tone formal, rehearsed. Jack's fists clenched. The next 45 minutes were a blur, emergency responders questioning an animal control officer arriving to take Buddy's body. Lily refused to let go until Jack finally coaxed her away, his voice breaking as he promised they'd never forget him. That night the Carson house was silent. Lily sat on her bed, Buddy's collar clutched in her hands. Jack stood in the hallway watching through the open door, the guilt curling in his stomach like smoke. He hadn't protected her, and someone needed to answer for that. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above Jack Carson's head as he stepped through the heavy glass doors of the Crescent Pines Police Department. The lobby was overly clean, clinical, like a place that wanted to look orderly rather than be it. The reception desk stood vacant, though a camera above tracked every movement. Jack's boots echoed against the tile as he passed the community commitment slogan printed across a mural of smiling officers shaking hands with school children. The irony made his stomach churn. He had received the call 20 minutes earlier. Lily was at the station. No further information was provided. No request for permission. No explanation of why his daughter, 11, traumatized, grieving, had been brought in alone. At the front desk now stood a heavy-set man with thinning blonde hair, and a uniform pressed into harsh creases. Captain Raymond Boland, mid-60s, had a face weathered by time and politics with narrow blue eyes that looked right through people. His uniform bore enough commendations to intimidate the uninformed. But Jack, a former Delta Force operative, recognized something else beneath the medals, a man far more practiced in control than justice. "Jack Carson," Jack said curtly. "I'm here for my daughter." Boland gave a tight nod. "She's in room 3 with Officer Nash. Standard questioning." Without a guardian, Jack asked, stepping closer. His voice was low but sharp. "She's 11. You're out of line." Boland raised an eyebrow. "She was a witness in a public incident involving the use of force. Officer Granger's report noted the dog became aggressive. We have a right to ask her what happened." Jack leaned forward, jaw clenched. "You don't get to traumatize a grieving child again to protect your officer's lie. Where is she?" Boland's posture stiffened. "Watch your tone, mister." "Carson, we don't tolerate threats to law enforcement here." Jack's eyes narrowed. "And I don't tolerate people abusing their badges." A beat passed. Boland didn't respond, but gestured to a young desk clerk who led Jack down the hall to a narrow room. Inside, Lily sat at a metal table, shoulders hunched, fingers tangled in the frayed sleeves of her sweatshirt. Officer Nash loomed across from her, not menacing but indifferent, like a man who had already made up his mind. "Lily," Jack said, opening the door. She looked up sharply, eyes wide, filled with both relief and something else, fear. "I'm taking her home," he said. "Now." Nash stood. "We're not finished." "Yes, you are." Jack lifted Lily into his arms as she stood, and she clung to him without a word. Her face buried in his shoulder, her frame shaking silently. Nash didn't follow. Outside, under the wide Oregon sky, Jack carried her to the car and sat in the back seat with her until her breathing steadied. She didn't speak. Not on the drive home, not when he tucked her into bed, not when he sat beside her the rest of the night. The next morning, her voice still absent, Jack called someone he hadn't spoken to in nearly 2 years. Doctor. Lauren Kim was a trauma therapist in Portland, mid-40s, with a calm, sharp intelligence that often disarmed even the most hardened soldiers. Tall and elegant, she dressed simply, often in soft earth tones, and always with a pendant of her mother's around her neck. She and Jack had met during his last deployment reintegration training. She'd helped him then, now it was Lily's turn. Lauren arrived that afternoon, her presence quiet but commanding. She didn't force conversation. Instead, she sat beside Lily on the porch, both of them watching the empty spot where Buddy's bed used to be. When Lily cried, it wasn't a sob, but a soundless stream of tears that Lauren gently acknowledged with her hand resting lightly over Lily's. Inside the house, Jack watched from the window, a helplessness swelling in his chest that felt more dangerous than any battlefield. The enemy was intangible here: grief, fear, systemic apathy. Across town, Maya Ellis sat in her apartment, eyes flicking between browser tabs, text threads, and a paused video, the one she had filmed of Granger after the shot. Her hands trembled slightly, the echo of adrenaline still lingering. The anonymous threat still burned in her mind. She needed help. She opened a secure messaging app and typed to a contact, saved only as Jay Crawford, a former classmate from Northwestern, now working as an analyst for the FBI's Portland field office. "M. Can you talk? I saw something. It's big, possibly systemic." The reply came 10 minutes later. "JC. I can't do much officially unless you have evidence, but off the record, tell me what you have." Maya outlined the situation: Buddy's death, the officer's version of events, her video, and the strange silence surrounding the case. Crawford's response was cautious but direct. "JC, if this is part of a pattern, you need to compile everything. Time-stamped, sourced, secured. Because if it is organized, someone's covering tracks. And this town won't give up secrets easily. M. You think it's part of something coordinated, JC. I think you're standing at the edge of something ugly. And they just noticed you." Maya stared at her screen. The pressure in her chest didn't feel like fear anymore. It felt like clarity. That night, Jack sat by Lily's bedside again. She still hadn't spoken, but she hadn't pushed him away either. Her hand curled loosely around his shirt sleeve. He brushed a strand of hair from her face just like Eleanor used to. "We're going to get through this," he said softly. "Not just survive it. We're going to fight back, baby. I promise you that." In the living room, Lauren Kim reviewed her notes. PTSD was certain grief complicated by trauma compounded by systemic betrayal. It would take more than therapy. It would take truth, justice, safety. She looked up as Jack entered. "You've dealt with trauma your whole life," she said gently. "But Lily's too young to carry that weight. You can't fix this with force." Jack sat heavily. "I know. But you can fight smart," she added. "If this town tried to silence her, tried to silence you, you need to make sure they can't." The sky over Crescent Pines was heavy with low gray clouds, the kind that threatened rain, but never delivered, just a lingering weight that made everything feel muffled. Jack Carson stood on the roof of his garage, tightening the mount of the last camera. The angle was perfect. It faced the front walkway but blended into the eaves, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. From this vantage point, it would capture every approach, every interaction, every lie. Inside the house, Jack had already installed 3 more cameras, one at the front door, another in the living room where guests were often invited in, and a third hidden in a hollowed book on the hallway shelf. His military training wasn't just about combat. It had taught him how to wait, observe, record, and anticipate the enemy's next move before they made it. He didn't need confrontation, he needed proof. Every night for the past week, he had tracked the patrol patterns of Officers Granger and Nash. Their routes were irregular, but not random. They passed Sycamore Lane 3 out of every 5 days, always slowing near Jack's house. Sometimes they lingered headlights, paused too long. Once they even pulled into the driveway and backed out without exiting the vehicle. Jack made a note of each occurrence time angle, even the sound of the tires against the gravel. The bait would have to be subtle. That same day across town, Maya Ellis sat in a dimly lit booth at a quiet Thai restaurant, her laptop open and papers spread across the table. She'd taken the advice of her FBI contact seriously. She was building a profile on Granger and Nash, documenting complaints, patrol irregularities, and disciplinary histories. And now something new. She had discovered that both officers had received advanced tactical civilian engagement training through a private firm named Sentinel Horizon, an Oregon-based security consultancy run by former military contractors. The firm had been flagged 2 years prior for training local police with aggressive crowd control and pre-incident intervention techniques that mirrored military insurgency strategies. Their motto, control through authority, order through fear. Maya leaned back in her seat, running a hand through her curls. She typed a query into the National Press Archives and found a chilling pattern. Every officer accused of brutality or overreach in Sentinel Horizon's training regions had ties to the firm. And in several of those cases, the officers had been cleared due to lack of video evidence. She stared at the screen. Not this time. She opened her secure chat and messaged Jay Crawford again. M confirmed. Sentinel Horizon trained both Granger and Nash. I'm requesting their training footage and lecture materials through press rights. JC Good. But be careful. If they're connected to larger networks, they may be watching your activity. Use proxies. M. Already ahead of you. Back at the Carson home. Jack reviewed the footage from the previous night. Nothing yet. But the psychological warfare had begun. The mailbox had been opened and left hanging. A dead squirrel was found on their porch, fresh placed, not coincidental. One of the side windows had greasy handprints just out of sight from the front cameras. They wanted to provoke him. He was going to let them. The trap was simple. Jack left a call into the department's tip line reporting a suspicious figure loitering outside his own home anonymously. He knew the shift schedule. Granger and Nash would get the call. They always did. That evening, he set the scene. He left the porch light on. The front door slightly ajar, just enough to seem careless. Inside, he placed a cup of coffee on the table, still warm. The TV played a local news loop at low volume. Jack himself waited in the living room, out of view, seated in the corner with his phone ready and the cameras rolling. At 9:42 p.m., the cruiser appeared. It coasted silently down Sycamore Lane and pulled up to the curb. The dome lights stayed off. After a long pause, the passenger door opened. Officer Nash stepped out first. Tall, older, bulkier now than in his academy days, with a gait that had grown lazy over time. His face held that familiar smugness, the confidence of a man who had never been held accountable. Then came Officer Granger, more cautious eyes sweeping the yard with a predator's intuition. His jaw clenched when he saw the cracked door. Jack's fingers hovered near the call button, but he waited. Nash approached first, tapping the door lightly. "Anyone home?" No response. He opened the door wider. Granger followed. Jack hit record manually as the two officers entered without a warrant, without permission. Granger scanned the room. "Looks staged." Nash nodded. "Could be bait." "I don't like this," Granger muttered. "Let's check it fast and get out." They stepped into the living room. Granger's gaze locked onto Jack, seated in the corner. "Well, well," Nash said. "Nice to see you again, Mr. Carson." Jack stayed still. "I didn't invite you in," responding to a call Granger said. "Then you should have knocked," Jack replied evenly, and waited for a response. Granger moved closer. "Funny how you're always just on the edge of being threatening. Funny how you're always just on the edge of illegal." Jack shot back. Nash folded his arms. "You think you're clever? Trying to trap us?" "No," Jack said, standing slowly. "I'm not trying. I'm not." The sudden change in Granger's posture, tense aggressive, was exactly what Jack had been counting on. "Let me tell you something," Granger snapped, stepping into Jack's space. "You think your military past scares me? You're just another thug who thinks he's smarter than the badge." Jack didn't move. "The badge doesn't excuse corruption." "You want to see corruption?" Nash said, voice low. "Keep poking. We'll show you what real pushback looks like." Jack leaned closer. "I'm counting on it." He reached for his phone and held up the screen, live footage from 4 angles showing the officers in his home uninvited. The silence was electric. Granger's face flushed. Nash stepped back, mouth opening and closing as if words had suddenly failed him. "Get out," Jack said, calm as steel, "before I call internal affairs and every major media outlet I know." The officers left, slamming the door behind them. Jack stood in the silence, breathing deep, the weight of calculated risk pressing down on his chest. He had them now. And he wasn't alone. Rain fell in quiet sheets over Crescent Pines, turning the town's polished sidewalks into mirrors of light and reflection. It was the kind of gray that made everything feel hushed and tense, like the world was holding its breath. Jack Carson stood at the kitchen counter, staring out the window as the drops tapped softly against the glass. He had barely slept running and rerunning the footage he'd captured of Granger and Nash in his home, trespassing, posturing, threatening. The recordings were clear, damning irrefutable. That morning, he had sent the package to Maya. She was the only one he trusted with it now. At that exact moment, across town, in the cluttered back room of the Crescent Sentinel, Maya Ellis sat surrounded by multiple devices. The footage paused on 4 different screens. She replayed the sequence again and again, each angle showing the same thing, the officers entering without a warrant, the escalation, the threats. Her hands were steady, but her heart beat with a tight, furious rhythm. Maya's small office was half newsroom, half war room. On the wall behind her was a web of red string connecting names and incidents, a timeline of injustice in a town that prided itself on order. She hadn't slept either. But she was closer than anyone had dared to get before. She opened an encrypted drive and uploaded everything. Then she called her contact. Jason Crawford, late 30s, wore his cynicism like armor. An analyst with the FBI's Portland Civil Rights Division, he had a trimmed beard, sharp brown eyes, and a voice that rarely betrayed surprise. When Maya first called him, he was skeptical, but the footage changed that. Now he was on board. "That's enough to start an inquiry," Jason said through the call. "I'll escalate this, but expect pushback. A department that protects its own won't go down without a fight." "I found something else," Maya said, turning to her second laptop. She had spent the last 2 days digging through a cache of files leaked anonymously to a journalist's forum. "What kind of something?" She opened the document. It was a 27-page internal proposal marked Heritage Watch, Phase 2 implementation. No official header. Just a list of planned actions, neighborhood compliance, sweeps targeting of incompatible households, use of civil citations to create legal pressure, and most damning of all, a recommendation to utilize psychological profiling reports to challenge custody and housing of resistant families. "They're using the system itself," she whispered, "to break people down, to push them out without ever firing a shot." Jason's voice sharpened. "You're telling me this is more than just 2 bad officers. I'm telling you it's coordinated. And Jack Carson, he's not their first target, just the first one to fight back with proof." Meanwhile, Jack sat across from Lauren Kim, the trauma therapist, now helping him document everything for legal defense. She sat with her usual calm, dressed in a slate gray cardigan and jeans, her notebook open on the coffee table. Her demeanor was warm, but incisive, the kind of person who could make even silence feel meaningful. "They're trying to paint you unstable," she said gently. "Boland submitted a report to the Department of Child Welfare yesterday, said you exhibited combat behavior, emotional volatility, and potential threat to a minor's safety." Jack's hands tightened into fists. "That's fiction. It's strategic," Lauren said. "They're laying the groundwork to challenge your custody of Lily." Jack looked toward the hallway. Lily was curled on the couch, silent, hugging Buddy's collar like a lifeline. Her smile had not returned since that day in the park. Every sound outside still made her flinch. "I've seen what PTSD looks like," Jack said. "I'm not unstable, I'm angry." "That's different." Lauren nodded. "And we'll prove that. I'll submit my evaluation to counter theirs, but we need to stay ahead of this." At that moment, Jack's phone buzzed. A message from Maya FBI is in. "Meet me tonight. Urgent." That evening, they met in Maya's car parked in the far corner of an old high school lot. Rain pattered on the windshield streetlights, casting pools of amber across the wet asphalt. Maya slid over a printed copy of the Heritage Watch proposal. "This is what they're protecting," she said. "They've been operating under the radar for years, using citizen integrity language to mask their agenda. It's not about safety. It's about control. Race-class family structure. Anyone who doesn't fit." Jack read the first few pages in silence, the words making his pulse pound. "They were going to take my daughter. They still might," Maya said. "Unless we burn this entire network down." She handed him a flash drive. "Everything's on here. Jason's taking it to the FBI's Civil Rights Task Force. You need to prepare for retaliation." "I already am." The next day, Captain Raymond Boland summoned Jack to the station. This time, Jack brought a lawyer, Angela Torres, mid-40s, sharp-tongued and confident. She wore a navy blue suit and a glare that could cut steel. Boland, graying and stony-faced, leaned back in his chair with false calm. "We've received a report, Mr. Carson, suggesting you may no longer be in the best state to care for your daughter." Angela raised an eyebrow. "And what medical license qualifies you to make that assessment?" Boland folded his hands. "It's a matter of community concern. There's reason to believe your background may predispose you to violence." Jack didn't respond. Instead, he placed a folder on the table and opened it. Inside were printed stills from the video footage Granger and Nash entering without cause threatening speech captured in multiple angles. Boland's face twitched. "I have backups of this footage in 5 different locations," Jack said. and copies have already been forwarded to federal investigators. Angela leaned forward. If you pursue this false claim any further, Captain, you may find yourself answering questions under oath about everything. There was silence. Then Boland stood adjusting his tie. This conversation is over, but everyone in the room knew it had only just begun. Sunlight filtered in through the tall windows of the Crescent Pines County Courthouse, cutting across rows of wooden benches and casting narrow beams onto the floor like divine judgment. The courtroom was packed. Reporters scribbled notes on yellow legal pads, townspeople whispered in hushed tones, and at the center of it all sat Jack Carson, suit pressed, jaw tight, eyes fixed ahead. His presence was steady quiet, not the look of a man chasing revenge, but one anchoring himself to truth. Beside him sat Angela Torres, his civil rights attorney. With her sharp cheekbones, dark brown eyes, and fitted charcoal blazer, she looked like a woman who had never once been underestimated and had built a career out of ensuring that never happened again. Her voice when she rose to speak was clear and edged with steel. Across the aisle, Granger and Nash sat flanked by their defense team, stiff in suits they weren't used to wearing, shifting under the weight of stares. Neither looked up. At the witness stand sat Judge Evelyn March, a woman in her early 60s with silver-streaked hair coiled in a chignon and an expression that demanded honesty. Her reputation for impartiality was as firm as the gavel she wielded, and today that courtroom felt like it belonged to her, and her alone. The trial had been underway for 2 days. Video footage had been submitted, the breaking and entering, the intimidation, the threats. Expert testimony from Dr. Lauren Kim confirmed that both Lily and Jack had been subjected to trauma worsened by police misconduct. Statements from FBI analysts supported Maya's findings about Sentinel Horizon and the clandestine Heritage Watch initiative. But it was Maya's voice that broke the room open. She took the stand wearing a forest green blouse beneath a simple blazer, curls, pinned back posture upright. Her words were measured precise, not the voice of outrage, but the voice of exposure. I reviewed over 100 pages of internal documents leaked by a whistleblower, she said. These documents outlined an organized effort, unofficial but systematically tolerated, to target specific families under the guise of neighborhood safety. They called it cultural stability. But what it really was forced attrition by policy. Gasps rippled through the room. She continued. These policies were backed by fabricated complaints, selective enforcement, and intimidation, especially aimed at military veterans and families of color. Mr. Carson wasn't the first victim. He was the first to fight back publicly. The system wasn't prepared for someone who recorded everything. Jack didn't blink. He watched Granger's hands tremble slightly in his lap. Nash stared at the floor. Angela stood. Ms. Ellis, are you aware that the department attempted to discredit Mr. Carson by filing a mental health complaint in an effort to remove custody of his daughter? I am. Maya said, her voice colder now. And I have the original memo recommending it. It was written by Captain Raymond Boland. It cited no medical basis, only behavioral notes taken by the same officers now under investigation. Thank you. The courtroom was silent as the footage of Granger threatening Jack played again on the central screen. Then came Nash's words, caught clearly by the hidden mic. You want pushback? We'll show you what it looks like. When the gavel finally struck that afternoon, Judge March's voice was calm but thunderous. This court finds officers Granger and Nash guilty of civil misconduct, abuse of authority, and falsifying incident reports. This court further finds that the actions taken against Jack Carson and his daughter constitute targeted intimidation and unlawful entry. There was no cheer, no applause, just silence like the moment before a dam breaks. Then the judge added, I am forwarding this decision to the district attorney for criminal charges and to the Department of Justice for further review into systemic misconduct within Crescent Pines Police Department. Outside reporters crowded the steps. Jack, shielded by Angela, kept Lily close. She wore a light denim jacket over a pink hoodie, her sketchbook clutched in her arms. "I don't want to talk to them," she said, voice quiet. "You don't have to," Jack assured. Maya emerged a few steps later, immediately surrounded. Flashbulbs lit her face as microphones pushed forward. "Is it true the Heritage Watch memo named other towns?" "Yes," Maya said plainly. "This isn't just about Crescent Pines. It's part of something bigger, and we're not done." Back at the house that night, the storm had passed. Lily sat cross-legged on the living room rug, colored pencils spread around her. Her fingers were stained with soft streaks of gold and sky blue. She had drawn Buddy again, but this time not curled in pain, not wounded. Instead, he had wings broad, soft, feathered like a dove's, and he hovered just above her figure in the drawing, his eyes looking down with that same quiet loyalty. Jack knelt beside her. "Is that you?" he asked, pointing to the small girl in the drawing. She nodded. "That's me now. He's still with me even if no one else sees him." Jack swallowed the lump rising in his throat. "You're right." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Do you think he knows we're okay?" "I think he never stopped watching," Jack whispered. "And I think he's proud." Outside, the stars finally broke through the clouds. 3 months had passed since the courthouse doors closed behind Jack and Lily Carson, since the town of Crescent Pines had been shaken from its carefully kept silence. The morning air in early spring was softer now, gentler. The trees, once bare and brooding, bore delicate green shoots that trembled in the breeze like cautious hope. Even the sunlight felt warmer, not just in temperature but in meaning, as if the town itself had finally exhaled. Jack guided the truck into the gravel lot of Willow Creek Animal Rescue nestled just beyond the edge of town. The building wasn't much white-paneled siding with a fading blue sign and hand-painted paw prints trailing toward the entrance, but its soul was generous. The woman who ran it, Marla Jenkins, was in her early 50s, tall and wiry, with skin tanned from years outdoors and kind eyes set deep in her sun-lined face. She had a pragmatic warmth about her, the kind that came from nursing both broken animals and broken people back to life. "You must be the Carsons," she greeted them as they stepped out. "We've been expecting you." Lily stood beside Jack, a little taller now, her face still marked by the quiet of grief, but beginning to soften around the edges. She wore her NASA hoodie again. It no longer fit quite right, but this time it was clean. In her arms, she carried a small, well-used sketchbook. On the inside of the cover, in looping blue marker, were the words, "In memory of Buddy." Marla led them to a small side enclosure where a bundle of golden fur tumbled clumsily through the grass. The puppy was no more than 5 months old, with large floppy ears and a coat the color of honey, its tail a blur of excited motion. When it spotted Lily, it bounded forward, paws too big for its legs, and let out a bark that was more squeak than sound. "She came to us from a roadside ditch 2 months ago," Marla explained. "No collar, no microchip, just ribs and matted fur. But she's got heart." Lily crouched. The puppy licked her fingers eagerly, then nuzzled into her lap, like it had always belonged there. A smile, small, genuine, and trembling, broke across Lily's face. "What's her name?" she whispered. "We've been calling her Hope," Marla said. Lily nodded. "That's the right name." Jack knelt beside her, resting a hand on her shoulder. "What do you think?" Lily looked up at him, eyes shining. "I think I'm ready." Back home, Hope quickly made herself known. She chewed through 2 leashes, 3 slippers, and 1 corner of the living room rug. She barked at her reflection in the oven and chased the shadows on the floor like they were monsters only she could see. But at night she curled at the foot of Lily's bed, her breathing slow and soft, and for the first time since Buddy Lily slept through until morning. Jack watched this transformation quietly from the hallway or the porch, often with a coffee cup in hand and his fingers drumming against his knee. The house felt different now. Not healed, he knew grief never fully left, but changed, filled again. Across town, Maya Ellis stood on the stage of the Northwest Investigative Journalism Conference, her hands nervously resting on the sides of the podium. Her hair was pulled into a neat twist, her blazer pressed, but her fingers trembled as she accepted the Meridian Award for Public Service Journalism. Her speech was short. This story wasn't mine. It was Lily's. It was Jack's. It was Buddy's. And it was the truth. That's all journalism should be, a light held up to what's been hidden. The applause was thunderous. But Maya wasn't finished. 2 weeks later, she registered a non-profit, the Buddy Foundation. Its mission was simple: provide trauma support and legal resources for children affected by law enforcement abuse and veterans silenced by systemic power. Within a month, she had secured a grant, a board of advisors, and her first case, a teenage girl in Tacoma, whose therapy dog had been taken without cause during a school search. Maya worked from a small office above a bookstore downtown. On the wall framed beside her press badge hung a drawing Lily had mailed her buddy with angel wings hovering over a child holding a leash. Jack helped too, quietly, not in meetings or press releases, but through letters to other vets offering his story, reminding them that silence was not strength. That survival meant using the tools of war to protect peace. On Lily's 12th birthday, they visited Buddy's favorite trail. The town had changed subtly. Granger and Nash were gone discharged, indicted. Boland had retired under pressure. Crescent Pines had elected its first civilian oversight board for the police department. And people now nodded to Jack on the street, not out of fear or forced politeness, but something closer to respect. They reached the old oak tree where Buddy used to stop and look back, waiting for Lily to catch up. There Jack placed a small plaque in the grass. Buddy, guardian, friend, hero. You were more than a dog. You were light in the dark. Hope barked once, chasing a squirrel. Lily laughed, and the sound of that laugh, free and full, felt like the final piece falling into place. As the sun dipped behind the treetops, casting gold across the trail, Lily turned to her father. "Do you think Hope knows what Buddy did?" Jack smiled. "I think she doesn't have to. She's living the life he made possible." And somewhere in the hush of wind between branches, it felt like Buddy was running beside them again. Sometimes healing doesn't arrive with thunder or miracles carved into stone. It comes softly, like a golden-furred puppy curling up beside a broken child, like a voice finally rising after weeks of silence, like a father holding on when the world tells him to let go. In the Carson family's journey, we are reminded that even in the darkest corners of injustice, God plants seeds of redemption. And sometimes that redemption has 4 legs, a wagging tail, and a name like Buddy or Hope. Buddy wasn't just a dog. He was protection, comfort, grace. And when the world tried to strip Lily of her innocence, God sent another guardian just when she was ready to receive love again. That's not coincidence. That's providence. In our lives, pain will come. We will lose. We will be tested, and we will stand before powers bigger than us. But if we walk in faith, act with courage, and choose love over hate, God moves. Quietly, faithfully, He moves. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to believe that healing is possible. Comment below your thoughts, and if you believe in God's timing. If you believe He still works through love, through animals, through people, brave enough to fight, comment. Amen. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Real, raw, redemptive. And may God bless you, protect your home, and place a buddy in your life when you need him most.
"Get that mud away from my kid! Someone do something!" The scream sliced through the thick Moroccan heat like a whip. Tourists near the dusty marketplace froze, startled. Children clung to their parents. Shopkeepers leaned out from shaded stalls. And there, in the middle of the chaos, stood a German shepherd, ribs visible beneath her scruffy coat, panting, trembling, but not running. She didn't bark or growl. She didn't move toward the child. She just stood there, eyes locked onto the man who had yelled, tail down, ears low, her body frozen in some invisible grief. Her name was Zara. No one there knew that, of course. To them, she was just another stray, one of many trying to survive the hot, unforgiving streets. But Zara wasn't like the others. Her eyes didn't flicker with fear or aggression. They begged, pleaded, searched. Just a few feet away, a woman in a faded denim jacket paused. She had been passing through on her way to the spice stalls, camera in one hand, bottle of water in the other. Her name was Isabel Romero, a solo traveler from Spain, who had been chasing color, culture, and maybe some quiet healing after the loss of her mother. She had seen hungry dogs before, but something about Zara made her pause. The dog's gaze wasn't wild. It was focused, almost intentional. As the crowd muttered and dispersed, Zara finally moved, not away from the people, but toward the alley. Slowly, limping slightly on one paw, she looked over her shoulder at Isabel, as if making sure she was watching. Then she disappeared behind a stack of empty crates. "Wait," Isabel whispered, stepping away from the road, ignoring the vendor who had started calling after her about silk scarves. She followed the dog. The alley was narrow, shadowed from the sun lined with peeling plaster and the sour smell of rotting produce. Isabel had no idea what she was doing, but something inside her, the part that still ached when she passed a mother holding a toddler's hand, refused to turn around. Zara paused halfway down the alley, glancing back. Then she ducked under a bent metal fence, leading into what looked like the remains of a burned-out shop. Isabel hesitated, heart racing. Then she crouched and crawled after her. It was dark and stifling inside. Dust floated in the air, beams of sun breaking through the charred roof. The smell hit her first, damp fur, mildew, and something else, something metallic. And then she saw them. A small bundle of blankets lay in the corner, barely moving. Isabel stepped closer, her breath catching. It wasn't a litter of puppies. It was a human baby, swaddled in a stained onesie, cheeks streaked with grime, lips trembling as if he'd long forgotten how to cry. The baby's chest rose and fell, shallow, labored. Zara nosed at him gently, then looked up at Isabel. It was not a coincidence. It was a plea. Isabel's knees buckled, and she dropped beside them, hands shaking. She checked the baby's forehead, burning, dehydrated, starving, maybe hours from death. Maybe less. She pulled her scarf off and wrapped it tighter around him. "Who left you here?" she whispered. "Who did this?" Zara gave a low whine and lay beside the baby, curling protectively around him like a living shield. Her tail thumped weakly. Her body pressed against the child's side. She had been keeping him warm, guarding him, and now she had asked for help. Isabel fumbled for her phone, hands slippery with sweat. No signal. Not here. Not in this crumbling part of the city tourists weren't meant to find. She had to get out. Fast. With the baby in her arms and Zara limping close behind, Isabel retraced her steps into the light. Her heart pounded as she flagged down a passing motorbike driver, ignoring the bewildered stares. She didn't stop to explain. She just climbed on, cradling the baby, yelling over the engine, "Hospital, now, please!" As the bike sped off, kicking up dust and confusion, Zara chased them for a few yards, then collapsed, panting in the street. Isabel turned. Their eyes met again, just for a second. Zara hadn't brought her here to be saved. She had brought her here to save the baby, and, whatever pain she carried, was still waiting to be uncovered. The hospital was overrun, loud, chaotic, patients in hallways, nurses rushing from one emergency to the next, and a long line at the reception. Isabel burst through the glass doors, breathless and cradling, the baby in her arms. The tiny body was limp, his skin pale beneath the dirt. A nurse looked up, confused for a moment, until she saw the child. Within seconds, a gurney appeared. Isabel didn't even have to explain. The urgency in her eyes, the condition of the baby, the sheer panic radiating from her body, it was enough. Doctors surrounded the infant and wheeled him away, leaving Isabel standing in the corridor, shaking. The cold air conditioning clashed with the heat in her chest. Her hands were covered in sweat and dust. Her heart wouldn't slow down. She kept glancing back at the doors, half expecting Zara to appear, limping her way in. But the dog had vanished. The moment Isabel left on the bike. No collar, no tags, just a stare that still haunted her. A young pediatrician, Dr. Farid, appeared an hour later with eyes full of concern and awe. If you hadn't brought him when you did, he said, voice low, we would be having a different conversation. Isabel nodded numbly. Will he make it? He's severely malnourished, borderline septic and dehydrated, Dr. Farid said. But he's stable, for now. She sat down on a nearby bench, the adrenaline crashing into her like a wave. That's when the questions started clawing at her brain. Who was this child? How did he end up in a burned-out ruin guarded by a stray German shepherd? And more importantly, why did that dog know to seek out help? It hadn't been random. Zara had chosen her, led her there, trusted her. The next morning, Isabel returned to the alley. She walked slowly through the market, her eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. Vendors tried to call her over, but she ignored them. When she reached the narrow path behind the spice stalls, her heart started racing. The scorched building still stood there, silent and hollow. And then she saw her, Zara, lying in the same spot by the broken crates, panting, exhausted. She didn't get up, just lifted her head and wagged her tail weakly. Isabel dropped to her knees. You stayed, she whispered. Zara's eyes fluttered closed and opened again, and then, slowly, she moved aside. At first, Isabel thought it was just a bundle of trash behind her, but it wasn't. 2 tiny puppies lay nestled in the corner, frail, whimpering, blind. One was barely breathing. Oh my God. Isabel's throat tightened. The baby hadn't been the only one. Zara had been trying to protect all of them, her own pups and the abandoned human infant. One had made it out. The others hadn't even been seen. Zara had never begged for herself. She had begged for them. Tears spilled down Isabel's cheeks as she scooped up the pups. She wrapped them in her scarf and looked at Zara, who tried to stand, stumbled, and fell. The pads of her paws were raw, bleeding. One leg was swollen. Her body was covered in scabs. She's not going to survive another night like this, Isabel murmured. She reached out, lifting Zara gently, holding both pups in her arms as she flagged down another bike. This time, the hospital wasn't the stop. She took them to a small veterinary clinic near the outskirts of the city, where an old man named Dr. Malik examined them in silence. His hands were kind, his eyes even kinder. This dog is no ordinary stray, he said quietly after the exam. She's been starved, beaten, and overworked, but her heart, it's intact and strong. One puppy had to be put on oxygen, the other barely nursed. Zara didn't leave their side, even as IVs were placed in her leg. She didn't whimper, didn't move, just kept watching them, eyes filled with something deeper than pain, something human. Back at the hospital, the baby had opened his eyes. Isabel visited him every day, learning from the nurses that he had no record, no match in the missing children database, no fingerprints, no clues. Only one piece of torn fabric in his blanket, a scrap from a military uniform. It was enough to spark whispers, but Isabel stayed focused on what she could control. Within a week, the stronger puppy began to bark. The weaker one opened its eyes. And Zara walked again. When the pediatrician asked Isabel if she wanted to apply for temporary guardianship of the baby until child services found answers, she said yes, before he finished the sentence. On the day she brought the baby to visit Zara, something extraordinary happened. Zara whined softly and stepped forward. The baby reached for her fur with tiny, clumsy fingers. His hand gripped her ear gently, and instead of pulling away, Zara licked his face. It was the first time he smiled. Dr. Farid and Dr. Malik both watched from the hallway, silent, moved. The woman who had come to Morocco to escape her own grief had become the anchor for 3 broken souls, a baby with no name, 2 pups with no future, and a dog who had once begged the world to look past her wounds. But only one woman had listened, and the story of what followed, well, that hadn't even begun yet. The days blurred together inside the small veterinary clinic, where the rhythm of healing was both silent and sacred. Isabel spent hours each day, moving between the hospital nursery where the rescued baby now lay recovering, and the quiet corner where Zara and her surviving puppies rested. There was something fragile and yet unbreakable about the bond that had formed between them. A tourist from another continent, an orphaned child, and a mother dog who had refused to let any of them be forgotten. One afternoon, as rain tapped gently on the clinic's windows, Dr. Malik sat beside Isabel and sighed. We may never know the full story, he murmured, but I've seen enough to understand this dog was protecting something bigger than just her litter. Isabel looked up. You mean the baby? He nodded slowly. She could have left him. Any dog would have. But she stayed. She led you back. She gave up her own safety for him. Isabel glanced at Zara, who was curled protectively around the weaker pup. She's more human than most people I've met. But just when things seemed to be finding a rhythm, everything shifted again. A nurse from the hospital called Isabel late that evening. Her voice was strained. "You need to come. There's someone here. Says he knows the baby." Isabel's heart sank. She rushed over, thoughts spinning. Had they found the parents? A relative? Or something darker? At the hospital, a tall man stood by the nursery window. He wore a worn army jacket, and his eyes, tired, sunken, trembling, were fixed on the tiny infant in the crib. His name was Adil. He introduced himself as a former soldier. He had returned from duty only a week ago, learning upon his arrival that his wife had died in a fire that destroyed the neighborhood they had once called home. Their newborn son had been declared missing, presumed dead. But Adil never believed. My wife, she had a dog. A German shepherd she trusted more than anyone. She said, if anything happened, Zara would protect the baby. Isabel's knees went weak. Her breath caught. "Zara," she whispered. He turned to her. "You've seen her." "I've more than seen her," Isabel said. "She saved your son." Tears slipped from Adil's eyes as he walked into the nursery and reached into the crib. The baby stirred and grasped his father's finger. It was the first time he had responded to anyone with that kind of trust. The hospital began. Formal procedures to verify Adil's claim. DNA testing. Family interviews. But for Isabel there was no doubt. The way Zara had carried herself, the way she had protected the baby, the urgency in her eyes when she sought help, it all made sense now. Back at the clinic, Isabel stood beside Zara's cot and gently stroked her head. "He's safe," she said. "You kept your promise." Zara blinked slowly and released a soft breath, as though a weight had lifted from her battered chest. But the story was far from over. A few nights later, someone broke into the clinic. The puppies were unharmed, but Zara had been injured again. Her old wounds reopened. Surveillance revealed a man trying to snatch one of the pups, only to be driven off by Zara's ferocious growl. She had defended her children once more, despite her failing strength. Dr. Malik, furious and shaken, told Isabel, she needs a safe place, somewhere permanent. Somewhere she's not just another stray with a story. That's when Isabel made her decision. She went to Adil the next morning. "I want to adopt Zara. If she's not already part of your family, I want her to be part of mine." Adil didn't hesitate. "She's more than a dog," he said. "She's a savior. And if there's anyone who's earned the right to stay with her, it's you." So the paperwork began. The puppies would grow under Zara's watchful eye. The baby, officially named Idris, would return home with his father in a week. And Isabel, who had come to Morocco to escape her own scars, suddenly found herself forming roots in a country that had offered her nothing but the unexpected. But fate, as always, had one last twist. A woman from a nearby shelter arrived to visit Zara after hearing her story. She had seen a report from years ago, a missing dog named Zara, reported stolen by a military family who had served in disaster zones. Photos were matched, records aligned. It turned out, Zara had once been part of a trained emergency canine unit. She hadn't just known how to save lives, she had been trained to. And yet, even after being lost, abused, and forgotten, she had never lost that instinct. Isabel stared at Zara that evening, tears welling in her eyes. "You were never just a stray. You were always meant to protect, even when no one protected you." Zara nudged her hand gently, her eyes calm and knowing. In a world full of broken things, some spirits refused to shatter. Some fought quietly. Some waited for the right person to notice. And some, like Zara, saved more lives than anyone would ever count. And all it took was one moment of trust, one silent plea, one desperate German shepherd mother who refused to give up, no matter how many times the world tried to forget her. The next morning brought a sky heavy with clouds and a silence that felt almost too still, as if the world were bracing for something unseen. Isabel awoke on the clinic cot, with her fingers still curled beneath Zara's paw. The dog hadn't moved all night, still weak, but still breathing. The smallest of the 3 pups had curled into her belly again, while the other 2 were gently snoring nearby, each one finally fed, warm, and safe. Dr. Malik entered quietly and stood beside Isabel without speaking. He handed her a printed report, something from the animal hospital downtown. Isabel scanned it, her eyes widening. "This confirms it," she whispered. Zara was bred from a military line. She has a microchip, but it was never registered in her name, only to a retired handler named Samir Qureshi. He was stationed here a decade ago. He died 4 years back. Dr. Malik nodded. She was likely stolen, sold off, maybe even used for breeding. But she wasn't just any dog. She was trained. That's why she knew how to find help, why she wrapped herself around the baby, why she wouldn't leave without leading you back. Isabel's chest tightened as she looked down at Zara again. She didn't just survive. She remembered everything she was ever taught, even when humans forgot her. A faint whimper interrupted them. It wasn't one of the puppies. It came from the hallway. Isabel stepped out and saw the child. The baby boy who had been in critical care was now awake, small arms flailing, mouth open, demanding something no nurse could understand. The boy, Idris, had no mother to soothe him, no warmth except the machine's sterile crib and tubes tied to his fragile body. Instinct moved Isabel before reason could catch up. She called out gently and carried one of Zara's still warm towels from the clinic nursery. Then she did something most hospitals would never allow. She laid the towel across the infant's chest and brought Zara close to the crib's side. Idris stopped crying. Instantly, he blinked slowly, lips quivering, as though recognizing something that even his young brain couldn't fully grasp. His tiny fingers reached out and touched the blanket, his breathing easing. Zara didn't bark or growl. She didn't even rise, but her eyes opened, fixed calmly on the boy through the glass. It wasn't coincidence. It wasn't chance. That dog had stayed beside him for days, maybe longer, before Isabel ever found them. She wasn't just guarding her pups. She was protecting him, too. Suddenly, a phone rang. Dr. Malik answered, then stiffened. He handed it to Isabel with a strange look. A voice on the other end was shaking. "Is this the woman who brought in the German shepherd with the baby?" the man asked. His name was Adil, a former soldier who had recently returned to Marrakesh from active duty abroad. His wife had died in a building fire weeks ago, and with her, their baby boy had vanished. He had been told the baby had died, but something didn't feel right. Someone had mentioned a story on local news, a German shepherd carrying a human child, a dog refusing to leave a mountain road. "My wife trusted that dog with everything," Adil said quietly. "Her name was Zara." Isabel nearly dropped the phone. That evening, Adil arrived at the hospital. The moment he stepped into the nursery, the baby stirred again, arms twitching toward the sound of his father's voice. The room held its breath as Adil stepped closer and whispered the child's name. "Idris." The baby turned his head and let out the tiniest sob, not of pain, but of recognition. Zara, too weak to stand, let out a soft, rasping bark from across the room. It was her final confirmation. The doctors ordered expedited DNA testing. The results would take a few days, but no one in that clinic had doubts anymore. What mattered now was safety and family. But even as hope glimmered on the horizon, shadows returned. That same night, someone tried to break into the clinic. A man, seen only briefly on grainy camera footage, had tried to steal the remaining puppies. Zara had fought back, despite her fragile condition. Her shoulder was torn open again in the struggle. She had driven him away, but she was bleeding badly. When Isabel found her, she was curled tightly around her pups again, trembling and panting, blood staining the blanket beneath her. "No more," Isabel whispered, pressing her forehead to Zara's. "You shouldn't have to protect anyone anymore. Not like this." Dr. Malik worked through the night. Isabel refused to sleep, and by sunrise Zara's condition had stabilized, but barely. "She won't last long unless we get her to a proper facility," Malik said grimly. "But transporting her now could kill her." A choice had to be made. Risk the journey for better care, or let her rest where she was, surrounded by the only family she trusted. That morning, something shifted. Isabel walked into the nursery with Zara's blanket again, placed it beside Idris, and said gently, "You saved him. You deserve to see how this ends." Zara, barely able to rise, dragged herself forward, inch by inch. Her head lowered next to the baby's crib as Idris blinked up at her through the glass. It wasn't just recognition, it was connection. The kind that can't be taught, explained, or broken. For a moment the world felt quiet, but something was rising. A question, a choice. The sun rose behind a veil of pale clouds, casting soft light through the nursery windows. It was the kind of morning that made you believe in second chances. Quiet, warm, and gentle enough to ease even the most restless soul. But for Isabel, It began with a lump in her throat, and a prayer she hadn't known she believed in. Zara was still breathing, but barely. Her chest moved with effort, each rise slower than the last. Her body had given everything it could, fighting off starvation, infection, exhaustion, and finally an attack meant to rip away the only thing she had left. Her pups were curled beside her, nestled so close it was hard to see where one body ended and another began. And just a few feet away, baby Idris lay peacefully, warm under hospital lights, his tiny fist resting atop the edge of Zara's worn blanket. It wasn't just luck that had brought them all here. It was will. Zara's will. A mother's instinct. A soldier's memory. A dog's unshakable devotion. The vet's report came in quietly. Internal bleeding. Her organs were failing. Transporting her to a full facility wouldn't buy more than a few hours. All anyone could do now was give her peace. But Zara hadn't let go. Not yet. Adil arrived before noon, still carrying a bouquet of white tulips, his wife's favorite, and a toy giraffe he'd once bought for a baby he never got to hold. When he walked in and saw Zara curled around her pups and staring at Idris with tired eyes, he dropped to his knees beside her and whispered, "You kept him safe." Zara blinked slowly and shifted her head to rest near his lap. It was an unspoken answer. Yes. Through the storm, through the hunger, through the screaming silence of abandonment, she had kept his son alive. Tears fell freely now. From Adil, from Isabel, even Dr. Malik stepped aside, pretending to check a clipboard, though his glasses fogged with grief. The hospital had made arrangements. Zara would be allowed to stay in the nursery until her final breath. Her pups would remain with her. Idris would be moved back in beside them, but there was something else that needed to be done, something Zara hadn't finished yet. That evening, Isabel sat beside her one last time and spoke in a low, steady voice. "Your babies will grow. Be up safe. Idris has his father back. You don't have to fight anymore, Zara." For the first time, Zara closed her eyes without flinching, and a few minutes later, she was gone. Not with a whimper, not with fear, with peace. She passed the way only the bravest souls do, after their duty was done. Word spread quickly. The story of the German shepherd who saved a human baby and guarded her puppies until the very end flooded news feeds and morning broadcasts. But for those who were there, who touched her fur and looked into her amber eyes, Zara wasn't just a story. She was proof that love doesn't need words, that family isn't always blood, that sometimes the smallest heartbeat and the fiercest bark can shake the world into remembering what it means to care. Adil held a small funeral just outside the hospital garden. It wasn't grand, just a wooden box, a fresh patch of soil, and 3 sleeping puppies tucked safely in a nearby crate, watching from the shade. Isabel laid a single white tulip atop the grave. A tag hung from the box's handle. It read, "Zara, soldier, mother, hero." Weeks passed, but the memory of that dog never faded. Adil legally adopted all 3 puppies, naming them Noor, Bahar, and Tofan, light, spring, and storm. He said they represented what Zara had given his son, a light in darkness, hope after, sorrow and strength through chaos. Isabel, changed forever by the experience, applied for permanent residency in Morocco. She wanted to stay close, not just to the family, but to the feeling that something bigger had taken place. A reminder that sometimes it's not the loudest cries that change the world. It's the quiet loyalty of a soul that refuses to let go. And baby Idris? He grew stronger with each passing day. Doctors said it was a miracle. Adil said it was love. But Isabel knew the truth. It was Zara. In the years to come, a bronze statue was placed in the hospital garden. It showed a German shepherd curled protectively around a baby, 3 small pups nestled into her side. The plaque beneath it bore a simple line. She asked for nothing. She gave everything. And every time the wind passed through the garden, every time a child laughed nearby or a bird landed softly on the statue's edge, it felt like Zara was still there, watching, protecting, loving, always.